Okay. We should have some nice, polite little music. Hi, it's Nicola from the PDA space. And I'm really excited to have. I have an echo. Bear with me one moment. Let's see if this works now. So, Cathie, we were here today to talk about parent blame, fabricated illness, fabricated induced illness ahead of the conference on the 7th of May. Do you want to give just a 2-minute introduction of what parent blame is and what FII is?
Yeah, I mean, parent blame can come in many different forms. So it can be quite subtle, but ultimately it's about the parent being accused of not understanding or exaggerating or making up their child's difficulties. And but the subtleties can be that it can be used against parents so that they don't end up getting the right services to support a child who's not very well or a child with disabilities. What else do you want me to say, Nicola?
So some of the red flags on this is when only families or are the only ones who see it, aren't they? So can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, so there are lots of different reasons for a family seeing something, parents seeing something, the difficulties their child has, which aren't seen elsewhere. For example, as I think it's sort of common knowledge that many children can present as fine in school. They might have sort of might be autistic, ADHD. They're holding things together in school. When they get home, it's sort of everything's let loose and so their worst behaviour is presented. And that's no different to an adult having a bad day at work and then going home and just letting it all out because home's a safe place. But then that becomes pathologised because school or wherever else can say they're fine here, they're not fine at home, therefore the problem's got to be home. And that's as simple as it is. And the other thing that I find really galling is that a really high percentage of people accused of fabricated or induced illness and blamed are parents and are women. So there's a much higher percentage of women and a high percentage of autistic women, and that's what the research shows. So there can be a family where there's two parents. If they're in a sort of mother and father situation, it can be the woman that's blamed and the dad isn't. I mean, it's nonsensical. So this is what happens, and it's absolutely clear from the hundreds of families that I've been in contact with who have been accused of FII.
It is, and that's one of the topics, isn't it? On the 7th of May, we've got Dr. Judy Eaton talking about the mothers who are misunderstood.
Yeah.
And, understanding part of why that is and the different, communication styles, which seems to create a bit of a red flag. And then as a professional yourself, an independent social worker, you wrote alongside some other professionals the practice guide for the British Association of Social Workers. Yeah, they couldn't make that any easier for me to say, could they? And the reason you guys did that was, do you want to explain a little bit of why you guys created the practice guide and why we're inviting professionals to attend this vital conversation? Because we need them, don't we, to change the lens, change the narrative, and look a little bit deeper and differently.
Yeah. So the practice guide, it sort of started when I was noticing more and more people were contacting me about fabricated or induced illness or parent blame. So, and it wasn't always necessarily obvious at the first sort of contact, but you know, when I was working with the family, doing an assessment probably for an education, health and care plan or similar, parents were being blamed or they were being told there's nothing wrong with your child. But no, there's nothing wrong. I would say there's something different. And from that, I ended up meeting what they called a person from the British Association of Social Workers. I went to a meeting and they gave me a lift in their car with my next door neighbour who's a social worker. And I was talking about this to the BASWA officer and they said, you need to write a practice guide on this. And so that I pursued that and got a team of experts together to support it. And what we wanted to do was really sort of offer an alternative to the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health practice guide, which is on perplexing presentations and fabricated or induced illness. So it wasn't to undermine, well, it would undermine their practice guide, but it's sort of inviting social workers particularly to look at FII in a different way, to ask questions rather than accepting at face value that if a doctor makes a referral to social care and they said this person has FII, to not to sort of think it through. So that was what happened, and the team that were involved were Dr. Fiona Gullen-Scott, Dr. Judy Eaton, Professor Andy Bilson, and Sally Russell from the PDA Society. And then Professor Luke Clements was the person who read it through and made sure that it was legally sound. So that's who we are.
We're really fortunate at the conference because we have got Dr. Judy Eaton, as we've already said, talking about the misunderstood and misdiagnosed women, mums. We've got Dr. Fiona Gillen-Scott talking about her recent research and everything that they've been finding out. We've got Andy Bilson, Professor Andy Bilson, who I can't say the word, but does statistics. And his statistics are quite stark and quite shocking. And I think it gives it that real depth because it really ensures, doesn't it? That really and truly there is nothing underpinning any of these accusations. And all it does do is cause tremendous harm to families and children. And the impact then that has on the entire family. And there is a horrific statistic about the impact by not getting the right support on the family and people ending lives. And which is why, we came together and said, yeah, let's host this conference. And why we've got, yourselves coming in and talking, because we need professionals to have a deeper understanding, don't we, of what's going on. And I'm really curious with you around one thing, which can often be, people say there's no smoke without fire, or, you know, one person has said, you know, a parent blame, or that the child was fine, or whatever it might be. And going back to that phrase of, well, there's no smoke without fire. You and I both know that very often actually there can be. Do you want to perhaps share a bit more of how that can happen as a, you know, professionally, that once one person who's working or has been involved with the family and they say, oh, but they're fine, how that and then perhaps that, you know, there's parent blame, how that then just sort of trundles on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes, and so one of the things that does happen, and again, it's been statistically research proven, is when a parent makes a complaint against school, social services, child and adolescent mental health services, and or a doctor or any other clinician, sometimes the consequences of that is they are accused of fabricated or induced illness, and they're blamed. If a referral was made through to safeguarding, which is the lead agency is social services, that it seems, the impression I get, and this has been repeated over and over again, is everybody starts to look at the parent's behaviour through that lens of fabricated or induced illness, that they're exaggerating or making up their child's difficulties, and, you know, they're hindering their development. So, and it's very, very challenging to undo that. And even when there have been experts who've stood up against this, and a couple of my colleagues who are going to present at the conference, you know, in the court arena, they've had a really, really difficult time, excruciatingly difficult. So I think, you know, when parents, the accusation happens and then it sticks. Sadness is that when it happened, because of the stigmatization of a child being on a child protection plan or a child being removed from parental care, with that, where that is, you know, there can be a general belief that there is no smoke without fire, it becomes much harder for parents to share what's happened or for people to understand it. And it does lead to sort of shame and, you know, extreme anxiety and, you know, and I actually say post-traumatic stress disorder in the longer term, because that's what I see in the people that I work with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's an ongoing, really difficult situation, and the stress. And as you say, if a child's put on a child protection plan when there is no reason, and parents have requested support or whatever that looks like, if it's within education or healthcare or social care, and every area has its different language, that is horrifying. And then you add the level of a child being removed from the parents. It's no wonder that there's, you know, PTSD, complex PTSD.
I'd say though, Nicola, that you know, the agencies believe there is a reason for a child to be on the child protection plan. So that, you know, I'm not saying there are, but they believe that. So that's their decision. And the other thing that, you know, there are a very few parents who would exaggerate or make up their child's difficulties for a whole sort of a lot of different reasons. So it does happen. Fabricated or induced illness isn't a diagnosis. If we're looking at a diagnosis of a really rare psychiatric disorder, it's called factitious disorder imposed on another. And it is extremely, extremely rare. It used to be called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And there's so much confusion by professionals that FII is the same as what was called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and it isn't. It's completely different. So I needed to clarify that, because anyone watching it, I don't, there will be parents that, do intentionally cause their children harm, or don't realise that they're doing that.
Oh, thank you for clearing that, because absolutely there are some children that do need to be on child protection plan. But the families we're talking about tonight, and the situations very often, is where it's spiraled because people have asked for help or put a complaint in or just misunderstood, and it has spiraled. And I'm really grateful for you to have covered again, I find the word really difficult to say, Munchausen by proxy, because that to me was always if you deliberately hurt the child for them to be sick. Whereas with FII, it's because we're exaggerating, or it's deemed by others or other professionals that the parent is exaggerating the need instead of what's needed. And just thinking about May the 7th and our day with professionals like yourselves coming in and sharing and covering different topics, from what it really is, and the statistics, research, and what parents can do when they're starting to see this happening, but also for the professionals out there who are like, why come? What would be beneficial for them? What are they going to gain?
What professionals will gain is an insight into what fabricated or induced illness really looks like, uh, uh, or what it really looks like when a parent is exaggerating or making up the child's difficulties, and what it's not. It will also provide different narratives about the research that's been looked at by Fiona Gunn-Scott, by Professor Andy Bilson, because they've done some really powerful research. And Andy's very recently written a paper, which I think is soon to be published, about how many children have actually been harmed when a parent's been accused of FII. And it's a really, really low number. I can't remember what the statistics are, but he can talk about that. So I think that's helpful. It will also be about Dr. Judy Eaton talking about missed and misdiagnosis. So one of the factors which comes up in the Royal College guidance historically, and is if a parent has been, it's one of, yes, great book. So if a parent has been, it's usually the mother again, diagnosed with a borderline or emotionally unstable personality disorder, well, that puts them into the FII category very quickly. And yet so many autistic women are misdiagnosed before their autism is recognised. So there are lots of different factors, and that's what Judy will talk about. So there's also Daniel Cooper, who's a human rights lawyer and advocate, who's going to be talking about his work and what he's doing to challenge, the practice of far too many families, as in hundreds and hundreds of families, being wrongly accused of FII. The last time I spoke with him, he had talked or communicated with 750 families, and I'm sure it's got higher and higher. So it's been a really big job, and he can talk about his part in this. So and there are the PDA Society is going to be there talking about how PDA is not accepted and misunderstood in so many domains, and that causes huge problems, because then families are left supporting a child or an adult who is a PDA, and they're not getting the right services.
Exactly, and thank you for highlighting that we've got a human rights lawyer coming to speak, because it is a human rights issue, a huge human rights issue, because there's also never an apology for families once it's been dropped. There's never nothing sort of goes back to how it was. And that's the, I've since I've advertised that I was hosting the conference alongside yourself, the messages, the emails, the same story of, our situation, it was cleared, but we've never been apologised to. Our name's never been cleared, and it's the same. It isn't the same story, because obviously it's really deeply personal to every family, but it's that underlying the same story, that families don't ever get an apology. They don't feel like their name ever gets cleared, and they're left, I was going to say just left with huge amounts, as you've already said, trauma, emotional impact, which can then have an impact physically, mentally on them.
Yeah, I mean, the ramifications are huge. So even, and this is my experience, because I also work as a psychotherapist. I just have a very small practice, and a high percentage of the women that I'm working with are autistic parents accused of FII. So I really understand the long-term effects of being wrongly accused. And I know from my social work practice that people have had their children removed from their care. Very, very capable, competent professional, it's usually women, their careers have been wrecked because of this. It doesn't come off of a medical record, so it stays there. So, it might flash up on the computer, or parents become fearful of taking their child to A&E, etc., because they might be accused again. So even those that are short-term accusations cause a lot of harm, and long-term, it just goes on and on and on. And I don't think it's like, I don't think, oh, this person's situation is worse than that person's situation, because there's so much trauma, and each person experiences trauma very differently. So what can be a seemingly short incident can impact somebody's life for the rest of their life if they don't get the right support. It's horrible. It really is. It's sort of insidious and horrible. And I'd say from a social work point of view, social workers, we need to get it right. We need to make sure there are really clear guidelines and criteria to sort of identify children that really do need to be on a child protection plan, and those that don't.
There are obviously children who are at risk, that need to be, looked after, and investigations need to be done. But what's happening is so much time is being used on other cases where it's, due to the fabrication. Before we end, I really want to thank you for coming on and being the first person with me to do the live on my YouTube channel. Is there's, going back to the harm it causes, and the no apology, and then someone needing to go and get support, emotional support afterwards. It's huge. Otherwise, it can often feel like that abuse is continuing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's just, I think once it's happened, it's really hard to, well, it isn't a case of just letting go, because it does affect so much of a parent's life. But also, Nicola, what we haven't talked about is the trauma that the children go through, because it's highly, highly traumatic. And then there's, if there's a child with additional needs, is how, you know, how that affects the siblings as well. So it's huge. And actually, you know, we've sort of missed the most important bit here, is how children are affected when their parents are so traumatized, being accused of doing something they're not doing, and what happens to them.
Absolutely, yes. I've missed the biggest part of all of this. And as you say, the siblings that are impacted because of this going on, and parents' energy, you know, constantly needing to resolve this, that hypervigilance, as you say, you know, worrying about everything. So if there is you know, a credible reason to go to A&E, worrying about going, seeking any help with any professional. And absolutely, and there's some horrific stories that I've been sent the details where families haven't seen the child, and the child hasn't been with the family for a very long time, which is heartbreaking. Heartbreaking doesn't even sum it up.
Yeah.
And when going back to Professor Andy Bilson's statistics of it's under 0.0% that anything's ever happened, that, you know, I'm not the best mathematician, but when you're looking at statistics like that, the balance is just so wrong, which is why, you know, we're doing this today. We'd like, you know, people to come along, attend. For professionals, they've got the opportunity to have the recordings for 3 months, opportunity to get some CPD hours under their belt, and have an opportunity to get some really great learning around a way of, you know, changing the way that they approach these situations. I'm sure that there'll be real nuggets through the webinars that they'll hear, and it'll impact them. And it won't be a moment in that moment. It will be lifelong when they reflect back and go, when they're working with a family, if it's yourself or Dr. Judy Eaton or Dr. Fiona Scott, or we haven't mentioned Libby Hills talking, any of the amazing speakers we've got, with, you know, Alice running, that they will then have those moments of, maybe that will be that moment to change my lens, change the way I look at this situation. And what we really need is, when professionals are walking into these situations, in a way, is not listen to everybody else's, you know, backstory, and go there with new eyes, being curious. And the other biggest thing that you have said all the way along through this is really, and Libby mentions it as well, is training. You know, there's such a misunderstood of what actually autism is, neurodivergence is, pandas. I mean, we could list all sorts of different things, but that lack of understanding, which is where this often stems from.
Well, yeah, I mean, Nicola, I think we can say about both of us that, you know, we're both neurodivergent, and we're both can be perceived as difficult parents. So, you know, it's happened, which is just tragic, really, isn't it? It's tragic that it happens.
But we like to deep dive, we like to get the knowledge, we like to have the information, and then
we like justice, we like the truth to come out. So,
social justice. Absolutely. Well, I'd like to say thank you to you for coming in and speaking tonight, and we're really looking forward to seeing everybody on the 7th of May. It's a Wednesday, because that is FII Awareness Week, and we're really excited to be hosting the first FII conference as a PDA space alongside with yourself, and these are wonderful professionals.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you for watching, listening, and hopefully you'll be at the conference.
Yeah, definitely.